Compulsive disorder, or OCD. Now, OCD is a disorder characterized by obsessive and ritualistic behavior. Dr. Susan Sweeto has spent years studying the connection between strep and OCD, and she joins us tonight to talk more about this. And why are people in your field finding strep throat so interesting and in such a connected way to OCD?
This research started it back in the mid-1980s, and at that time we made observations in children being treated with medications that a subgroup of them had a very abrupt onset of their symptoms. Each time it came back, it had been triggered by a strep infection.
And there are critics out there talking about this report that just don't buy it. What do you say to them?
I suppose there are some people who think new ideas are ugly because they're threatening. I never wanted, nor could I have ever imagined that I would be at the center of a controversy because we just were doing our job.
You f***ing people!
Kids are not supposed to be perfectly healthy one day and then completely tormented and very psychiatrically ill the next.
She recognized that you can have obsessive-compulsive features that come on following an infection.
It's probably very foreign to neurologists and to psychiatrists and to many people to even think about autoantibodies as causing a mental disorder.
He was a completely different kid. It was looking at a different kid in the same body.
There was no way that they could conceive of the possibility that he was not like that 2 weeks ago.
Doctors linked Maury's obsessive-compulsive behavior to a common ailment in children, strep throat. The likely relationship has been coined pandas.
We repeated the experiments over and over again, demonstrating this connection between the strep and the OCD. Probably the most effective of those experiments was using antibiotics to keep the children from getting strep and showing that that kept them from getting their OCD and tics back.
Anytime a new idea is propagated, there is an opposition to that idea because it takes people out of their comfort zone.
It is controversial. The concept got out of control. Every child who had new onset of tics was getting a course of antibiotics.
And I don't really believe that antibiotics help OCD.
Why is half of this medical community so against this research?
We don't really know as much as we should, and to some extent the public awareness has sort of moved ahead of the science.
The main problems with this illness is that parents are in charge.
We're not qualified. We're not qualified to make the types of decisions.
There isn't enough money for research, especially when we're talking about interventions that are not supported by big pharma.
It just shouldn't be this way. This experience has really shown me that our medical system is just so broken. It's just so broken.
One of the things that really sucks, it so sucks, because you're so tired every day to read papers and understand stuff and talk to doctors and say, listen, figure this out. I'm too tired to read this and explain it to you. Just do something for my kid, can you? Just do something for her.
I think the kids that are being missed, it's a staggering number, staggering.
Antibodies are a part of the immune system that attack foreign invaders and bacteria. Autoantibodies are confused. They attack cells that are healthy. This is called autoimmune disease. PANDAS stands for Pediatric Autoimmune Neuropsychiatric Disorder Associated with Streptococcus, which is a horrible thing to have, and more people should know about it.
In 1986, Dr. Susan Sweeto at the National Institute of Mental Health was studying children presenting with Sydenham's chorea, a post-streptococcal illness. One of the children Sweeto is studying, his mom notices his tics got worse each time he had a strep infection, which they treat with antibiotics. The child's ticking and strange behavior were remarkably reduced. Sweeto suspected this child wasn't alone.
He would literally scream bloody murder like a terror cry. Not just a I'm not getting my way cry, terror in his face. So we brought that up to the doctor when we went, and they sent us straight to the psychiatrist.
Unfortunately, the word possessed comes to mind, that this child was doing so beautifully and then complete and overnight different child.
It's not a 5-minute tantrum. It's not a 10-minute tantrum. He's gonna pick things up and he's gonna throw them. He's gonna, hit at people. He's gonna spit at people. You're done having class.
Well, we're going to meet with Logan's daycare provider, which is...
Also the preschool.
Yeah, and, well, they've had some issues with Logan there. I mean, Logan's created some issues there. A lot of assaults on other little kids.
Logan started here about 2 years ago, and he was your typical little boy. Sweet, smart, beautiful, funny, inquisitive. He was your regular kid.
Not being able to have both of us at work would be pretty...
It'd be a challenge.
Pretty huge struggle.
So originally, the meeting was supposed to be with us, the coach, and the regional director. However, that was prior to Friday's incident when Logan punched the student in the face. This is what I do. This is my life. And to realize that we are not equipped to help him. And I really pray they can get him, the help that they can get their baby back.
They were going to have to remove Logan from not only the preschool program, which was kind of separate from the daycare, but right now.
I anticipated that part, but I was not anticipating us being out.
Right.
He can't come here at all, even for childcare. So now we've got to figure something out.
I don't know what we're going to do yet.
PANDAS is distinguished from other kinds of obsessive-compulsive disorder and tic disorders and eating disorders by the fact that there's an unusually abrupt onset of symptoms. It literally comes on overnight.
Oh, there it's going.
Yep. This is not my daughter the way she was like a couple weeks ago.
She was at points pulling her hair out. I want to die, Daddy. You want me to die.
Raging at us because she was starving, telling us, I'm starving, feed me, feed me.
I promise you guys,
Perfectly safe.
if I had it right now, I would have an allergic reaction.
To an apple?
Yes,
Really?
I promise
Have you ever had an allergic reaction to an apple before?
I promise you that I would have an allergic reaction.
She'd stopped eating completely. She was completely dehydrated. They had to put an NG tube in. I mean, oh my God.
She ended up with a tube feeding through her nose. This is a totally different child.
The pediatrician will most often suggest that it is a psychiatric problem and have the child pretty immediately seen by a psychiatrist. Like, it doesn't occur to them that this could be a physical problem.
And the thing that I don't understand is how, if a pediatrician has taken care of that child typically multiple children in the family, right? And they've known this mom for 7, 8, 10 years. They've had good interactions around this child, and she comes into your office and she says, my child has fallen apart and X, Y, and Z. Why don't they remember that history of all the previous interactions with that mom and kind of go, oh my gosh, we've got a big problem here?
We realized, okay, she's not getting better. And it just snowballed from there. She ended up in the ER with dehydration and was admitted to the hospital.
You know, one of the things they said is maybe we coddled her too much. And I don't think they meant that in a bad way. I think they thought maybe that was part of the issue.
I later had a conversation with the doctor, the pediatrician who was in the same room with us the next day, and he said, so, you know, if she goes home and she comes back, she's going to be admitted to the psych floor. That terrified me, to put my child who has severe separation anxiety on a psych unit where we couldn't stay with her.
And I remember at the hospital one night, Christine and I would rotate, and I remember looking at our iPad and seeing pandas there, and I didn't read it. And I remember on Thursday, my wife floated that idea by the doctors.
OCD, anxiety, like, yeah, that's her. Acute onset, literal overnight onset. I said, yep, that's what I'm seeing.
Some comments from another one of the psych people, you know, don't believe everything you read on the internet and whatnot.
Talking to medical professionals who just blow it off. Like, well, it can't be that. Well, we don't know anything about it, so it can't be that. Well, what do you mean I've been saying this all along. You know what you know, you don't know what you don't know. And it's okay that you don't know, but figure it out. Get the information. And don't be mad at me because I go on the internet and look something up. That pisses me off.
Traditionally, physicians were felt to be godlike because we, have all this training, we have all this knowledge, and we know how to fix these problems.
And if you know this is bipolar, this is OCD, this is anxiety, and this is how you're taught to treat it, then that's what you do. Other people out there fear that, oh wow, everything I learned, my whole thing, my whole world's crashing down. This does not fit into my realm, so it can't exist.
Unfortunately, not all providers are open to the possibility of a parent even coming in and say, I heard of this or I read about this. It can piss them off. They don't like standardly being told what to do. They like being the expert.
This was diagnosed, he says, by a top doctor at Tufts Medical Center. But medical personnel at Boston Children's Hospital apparently disagree, saying she has a psychological condition. A resulting legal battle has led to the state getting custody of Justina.
If a parent disagrees with the diagnosis and chooses to believe that there may be an infectious trigger to their child's behavior, they can find themselves in a lot of trouble because the state can then come in and take custody of that child.
Hello, my handsome boy. I know that being away from home is so tough on you right now. This is completely understandable. But I want you to know that you're being very courageous, and I'm very proud of you. Oh, gosh. Preston, I know that being away from home is tough on you right now. It's completely understandable. But I want you to know that you're being very courageous, and I'm so proud of you. Before you know it, you'll be back home with us where you belong. Please be strong. Continue eating and drinking and taking your meds so you can get back home to us soon.
So it was very tough and on everybody involved. Just to have him committed to an institution against anyone's will and then not tell you when they're going to release him or if they're going to release him, that's a scary feeling to have someone take your child from you.
How does an 11-year-old child go from the safety of his rural home to being committed to a New Orleans psych unit? He was his normal self. Then suddenly, he wasn't. And it seems no one would listen to this mom.
He was completely dysfunctional. He would urinate on himself. He was completely overwhelmed with rituals.
He couldn't eat, he couldn't drink. He literally was wasting away. And I know he wanted to because he would tell me, I'm thirsty, I want a drink, but he couldn't bring himself to do it.
Kim and Steve try to get help, but no one in the local medical community invests the time to diagnose Preston. No blood work, no real medical workup. They're set out the door with a prescription for 25 milligrams of Zoloft, a psychiatric medication, which has no effect. So Kim gets on the road to a bigger town to see a specialist in child psychiatry who suggests that Preston's new school is the reason for his bizarre behavior. The psychiatrist increases the Zoloft to 100 milligrams and adds Vistarol, a sedative.
You just keep pushing, you just try to figure out what's wrong. I mean, we would just go to doctor after doctor and try to encourage him that it's okay, we'll figure out what's wrong, to keep his spirits up. But in the meantime, he would tell me something's wrong. My mind is telling me to do these things, and I don't know why.
Nothing is working for Preston. He's not eating, and he's getting worse each day. So they pack up the car and head to a university medical center in New Orleans. And even they don't know what to do with him. A physician's emergency certificate is issued, and Kim and Steve lose custody of Preston. He is taken across town to an adolescent psychiatric unit.
And that's where he cried and begged us not to leave him. Actually, I had to get up and go outside for a while. I couldn't handle it. It was just, break me in tears, and he couldn't let him see me doing that. But it was bad, real bad. You can't imagine how bad it was.
When I first got there, I didn't want to leave my parents. And all in bad shape.
After 20 years of controversy, Doctors Jonathan Mink and Susan Sweeto continue their long-running debate concerning strep and OCD at a Pandas PANS conference in St. Louis.
This is about hypothesis testing, about changing your views depending on the data, and then coming up with the next question. And this particular field, Pandas PANS, has been so emotional and political in so many ways that people are labeled pandas believers and pandas non-believers. You never hear people talk about multiple sclerosis believers and multiple sclerosis non-believers. Where we disagree is on matters where there can be multiple ways of interpreting the data. There were a couple of studies, one by Kurland et al., one by Leckman et al., around the same time, where they looked at this question of sudden dramatic exacerbation remission versus gradual waxing and waning, but they found that neither pattern was associated with preceding strep infections in that study.
We've been discussing this now for 20-some years. My biggest worry is the children that I'm still hearing from their parents today, that they have seen 10, 12, 15 doctors who quote, don't believe in pandas, and that the latest thing in the pediatric literature is that at best pandas is a controversial diagnosis and it probably doesn't exist. And we have a huge problem with children not getting appropriate care.
The families that believe that strep is causing their kids OCD or tics often report in ways that are perplexing that the tics or OCD get better as soon as they start the antibiotics.
No sore throat, no fever, no rash, nothing. They swabbed his throat and he was positive for strep. 3 days on antibiotics and he was a completely different child.
Is that because you started the antibiotics or because it was going to improve anyway? I'm certainly very skeptical if it improves the first day. If I believe there were good evidence that we should treat OCD with antibiotics, I would be doing it. I think everybody would.
What's the harm in testing for it? And I get that question from parents sometimes. You don't think that's what it is, but can't you just test for it? I don't test for strep in kids who have what I consider to be a pretty typical run-of-the-mill presentation of a tic disorder or tic disorder plus OCD or ADHD.
I would simply invite some of the non-believers, you call them. I mean, if they spend time in an office seeing children with this problem, acknowledging that not every child fits perfectly, and that's a challenge, but there are many who do. But I've just seen too many children with this sudden deterioration in their symptoms who improve with antibiotics for me to say that this doesn't exist.
You know, basically we were faced with a medical situation that we couldn't handle in Charlotte. Our doctors don't really believe in this disease or understand it. I think there's a combination. We've seen a neurologist and a pediatrician. I think our neurologist believes it's a real disease but doesn't know enough to treat it confidently. And our pediatrician, I think, won't give me a straight answer, keeps saying this is a disease, a diagnosis rather, that's controversial.
I can't breathe. I can't It's true.
Each attack reminds you again and again that the child has no control over themselves. It reminded me that certainly she wasn't doing this herself. It wasn't something she was choosing to do.
We've been down multiple paths on the medical side, on the psychiatric side, and you know, it's just dead end after dead end after dead end. Meanwhile, Greta's continuing to decline.
Gotta make sure there's no germs on it.
Catherine's always needs somebody around her. That's difficult. We're up at night. It's hell. It's hell. I don't know how people do this. I'm doing it. I just don't know. I have no idea how people can have a kid with this thing.
Just do it on the nose.
I feel lost. So it's trying to hold myself together so I don't fall apart. I have another daughter, Jillian. That's almost harder. Just trying to keep things normal. Whatever normal is, you know, her normal.
And I'm like, okay, so we get the doctors come around in the morning, and they started off, interestingly, about dismissing the PANS. They said, you know, we don't think it's the pandas because, hey, we didn't see any strep, evidence of strep, and she didn't have tics. My daughter doesn't have tics or jerky movements. I did have some reading, and I said, okay, all right, so, but 25% of the cases, just some fact I read, you know, there is no strep. And there's not always has to be tics. It's not you don't have to have every single symptom.
Well, we said we'd like to see Dr. Leckman, and no one knew who he was.
9-year-old Catherine is at Yale New Haven Hospital and would soon be admitted to the psychiatric unit. The staff was unaware they had a world-renowned panda psychiatrist on their own faculty, right across the street. Perhaps it was fortunate these parents had the internet.
And here's a smart young girl who's got all sorts of talent, whether it's softball or whatever it might happen to be, completely transformed over the course of a few days. Let's look into this.
That sounds good. I wish I felt more hopeful. I'm frustrated. And we're all frustrated.
Dr. Leckman diagnoses Catherine with PANDAS and recommends specialized treatment. They drive Catherine 7 hours to Washington, D.C.
Is this Catherine?
That's Catherine, yep.
Hi, Catherine. Hi. How are you? I'm Dr. Latimer. Hi.
Nice to meet you.
You too. Are you ready?
What?
Are you ready?
We're ready in just a minute. Are you ready?
The next day is when everything changed.
Again, so the funny feeling, was it the itchiness or was a funny feeling in your head?
The funny feeling she's talking about is the one in my head.
Okay. Did you have itchiness with the popcorn? A little. Okay. Okay.
I think. I can't really remember.
Yeah, it was kind of hard to remember. But by the next day, which was Friday, she was definitely not herself.
Catherine's rapid onset of symptoms concerns pediatric neurologist Beth Latimer. She will treat with antibiotics, steroids, and a low-dose SSRI. Because Catherine is anorexic, IVIG and plasmapheresis are considered.
Plasmapheresis is the separation of plasma from cells. A machine removes the bad plasma and replaces it with good plasma. In sick people, plasma can contain antibodies that attack the immune system.
Wait, would that be a needle?
That would be the plasmapheresis.
Which is a needle?
Yeah, but you'd be asleep for that.
Which I don't want to do.
That's easy. That's really easy. You go into the hospital.
But am I probably going to do that?
I don't know, because I don't know how you're going to do with the steroids, but I'm telling you, you're not going to go to your prom with like this.
This is going to be a while before we see any results of any treatment, but at least we have the next step to take. So I feel reassured about that. I can't really see much beyond my next step.
Any doubt in your mind, kind of what's going on?
No, not in her.
How can you be so sure?
Because she doesn't have quite that burdened look on her face that a lot of these children have, but it's the spitting. You know, even if she were to know, she's in the repetitive asking over and over and over again with the history from very reasonable parents that this happened, boom, one night, overnight. You know, typical OCD just doesn't come on like that.
We were at the point where we had tried behavior therapy, we had tried, different things that Mike and I could do, different things the school could do, and now they were suggesting that we try behavioral meds.
And we've always been pretty much against using medication, anything that might interfere with the development of Logan's brain. We wanted to be as careful as possible. Let's rule out everything before we get to the point where we're medicating him.
SSRIs stand for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. It is used to help people with depression and OCD. In Europe, they strongly recommended SSRIs not to be used on children.
It's like he's looking up at me in desperation, like, Grandma, I don't understand this. Please make this stop.
He doesn't really have any control over himself. How can he learn? How can he grow? How can he learn to socially interact with other people if he can't control himself?
I don't know what put it in my mind, but I said tomorrow, I don't care if it's a walk-in, I don't care if you get an appointment, you take him to the doctor, and I am going to tell that doctor, I want some blood work done. I don't know what all kind of test he needs, but there is something physically wrong with him. Good boy. You're such a good boy. And I told you.
Here we go. 1, 2, 3. That's all. That's all, Blue Bear. There you go. You're doing some good.
Now they're just getting Dr. Ashley P goes, have you ever heard of pandas?
He actually had heard of pandas and pans.
Logan had elevated blood titers suggestive of a strep infection. He also had all of the acute markers associated with pandas in terms of his clinical picture. In that scenario, to reach for an SSRI first, in my mind, is bad medicine. This child has a post-infectious encephalopathy until proven otherwise.
Encephalitis is a sudden onset inflammation of the brain. Autoimmune encephalitis is a medical condition in which the immune system attacks the brain.
So the first step in dealing with this disorder is to eliminate the antigens that are inducing the immune response. That's where antibiotics come in.
And a physician says, oh, they looked in the throat, it didn't look red, it didn't look this, and so they didn't do a culture. That's just not acceptable because you cannot tell if a child has a strep infection unless you do a throat culture.
I came to Minnesota in 1972 to work on strep. And of course, the more I learned about strep, the more I realized that this organism causes so much havoc. I mean, there's 100,000 people die of strep infections just in the U.S. every year.
We are diagnosing strep as a homogeneous species. There are 120 different strains of strep. Most of the testing available today, it's almost half a century old.
Most children who get strep throat get diagnosed on the basis of a rapid strep test. The streptococcal pathogen is never isolated, it's never saved, it's never studied.
We've done experiments recently which suggest that those tests miss strep infections 30% of the time.
I can't do anything. I can't really do anything the normal person would do. I can't think right. Everything gets jumbled.
Over the course of her life, she's been on maybe 30 different psych meds, perhaps? None of which ever did anything.
So now I'm all screwed up. That really makes me angry.
We talked about putting her into a type of treatment home. It's not for, say, for addicts, but it's for special needs, mentally disabled. It had gotten to the point where she was starting to think that sounded pretty good, just because there was just absolutely no hope here.
I always feel like I'm a problem. Like I'm a kind of like a broken.
The IVIG could possibly be this major reset that really, really helps her. And, because she's been sick for so long, the chances of her needing a second one are, really, really strong.
IVIG is a human blood product of healthy antibodies from thousands of donors. It is given through infusion.
I think my frustration with IVIG treatment is multifactorial. I'm frustrated that we don't know the mechanism, but they don't know it for any of the diseases. It's just a very complex drug and complex set of interactions. Because it is a scarce resource and tremendously expensive, you have to weigh the pros and cons of going with the treatment.
I'm scared. And I don't know how this will work. I don't know if it will work. I really hope it'll work, because I don't really think we have any other options. Like my mom said, if this doesn't work, then I don't know what I'm gonna do. Because I don't know if I can handle any more of this for the rest of my life.
I think there may be consequences if some of these conditions go undiagnosed for too long. And it can result in there actually being some degree of neurological damage that may not be reversible.
I always felt that my disease robbed me of my childhood.
Oh, really?
There were years or months or days where I just did not want to live anymore.
Sometimes she would say, I hope I don't wake up in the morning. It was dark. No mother ever wants to fear that, their kid's going to do something to take their life.
I was diagnosed with depression, OCD, anxiety, and a mood disorder at 6.
My husband and I were both on board. I was the main person who disciplined and everything, but we were totally on board together. But it was stressful when, the outside family would say, she just needs more discipline.
What proportion of those kids who present with OCD and anxiety actually have post-infectious or a neuroinflammatory etiology? I really don't know. And I don't know because in the early years, we were not really thinking about it and we didn't ask. if their child had had a sore throat 3 or 4 weeks previously and then had developed some anxiety or OCD, later on, it's very easy not to make that connection.
I decided to go inpatient at McLean's Hospital at the OCDI, which is the Obsessive Compulsive Disorder Institute. And I stayed there for 7 weeks. And I, did therapy every day. And it was hard. And, they really focused on exposure and response therapy. So it's like you literally facing your fears. They would have me watch videos of, people vomiting. And like one day I walked into my room and there was all these pictures everywhere of people vomiting and vomit everywhere. And it was horrifying. And I wasn't getting better. We then saw a psychiatrist who put me on different SSRIs, antipsychotics,
Prozac, Celexa,
Cymbalta, Lyrica,
benzos, Ativan, lorazepam.
And I would always ask my mom or my doctors, like, when's it gonna kick in? When's it gonna work?
And she would always say to me the same thing, like, why am I not getting better? Why am I taking these, drugs and I'm not getting better? The doctor's missing something. She was right.
It's all very well to say, I'm upset because this was not identified. Well, the truth is, we have a clinical diagnosis still only. I think that the SSRIs, may have had a bad rap when people were treating the one but not the other. So I don't think that one should be treating just the psychiatric symptoms and not attending to the underlying, immune modulation or, potential infectious cause. But to ignore the benefit of proven and relatively safe treatments for anxiety, for example, or mood instability, is also, I think, incorrect and probably medically negligent.
And it was just interesting to me that sort of we put it out there in 96 and then in 98, and one of the very first things that happened was a series of editorials. The questions then became, this is controversial, and if you want to kill something in medicine, particularly in pediatrics, you describe it as a controversial. And first, I wasn't prepared for the fact that a few individuals criticizing it could turn it into a controversy, could turn it into something that literally physicians now say they don't believe it happens.
Neurologists Don Gilbert, Roger Curlin, Harvey Singer, and others write several editorials opposing Sweeto's theory. The New York Times reports that Roger Curlin is one of her most vocal critics. He is quoted as saying, "Yes, it's true that some children develop rapid onset OCD and a high percentage test positive for strep. But does that mean the former is caused by the latter? In the prior 2 weeks, 90% of these kids may have also eaten pizza. Can I make the association that pizza is linked to OCD?"
In science, if you don't believe something, you should just sit back and wait for the data to come out. You should not be actively trying to stop research on something because you don't believe it. I think that's the wrong attitude.
It did make it very difficult for us as scientists because I could not get NIH money.
Having a hard time with the funding because of the amount of skepticism in the reviewers, some that are okay with it, but some that are fairly skeptic.
And what if the reviewers don't believe in pandas? I mean, then you put all that work in and they'll say, well, there's no such condition, and you don't get the funding.
I can't imagine an IRB would reject a research protocol because of some editorial somebody wrote. I just can't believe that.
The controversy so poisoned the study sections that grant applications were triaged, which means they were thrown in the wastebasket without even being reviewed because pandas was in the title.
So the minds of pediatricians who have been following the debate in the literature are not fresh, they're contaminated.
Negative publicity has, made our work a lot harder. And,
getting insurance authorization for these kids, even to hospitalize them, is a huge barrier.
The insurance companies will glom onto anything in the literature, basically, that says that, this is controversial or might not be true or this might not work, to try to say that it's experimental and therefore deny coverage.
I really feel like the situation with the insurance companies, it's kind of a war of attrition. They delay the process. They ask you for more documents, you send them, they sit, they ask you for more documents, and they repeat this over and over again. And then eventually you get a denial. Neurologists and rheumatologists and immunologists and psychiatrists and all of these people with this massive body of knowledge, and they're all trying to help these kids. And for the veto power to be in the hands of an insurer, it's not fair.
The concept of putting $10,000 on your credit card, it sort of seems obscene. But then when you kind of let go of that and do it,
once you open up the floodgates,
I feel like it doesn't matter anymore. Yeah. Hey, $400 unreimbursed doctor's appointment, swipe. Copay on some type of medicine that you need to get additional approval for, $150, swipe. IVIG, $7,000, $8,000, swipe.
So we had a home in San Diego that we refurbished, and we sold for twice what we paid for it.
Okay.
And then we were able to save enough money with the profits to buy this house.
And you ended up
selling it.
Why?
Because we couldn't afford to keep it after all the medical bills and my husband and I having to leave work and extra daycare for Caitlin. So, Pandas wiped us out.
Frustrated parents voice their concerns to the NIMH, and a meeting is convened in Washington between Sweeto's group and some of the more vocal neurologists who disagree that strep can cause OCD.
We just brought everybody in the field who could help think about this question into the same room, presented them with the observations, and challenged them to help us think about how it could be solved.
I think it was a compromise to try to get both camps to work together better. I'm not sure that really happened, but that was the attempt.
We reviewed the clinical presentations of the patients that I had seen, which was a fairly large number. Dr. Kovacevic in Chicago had seen.
Colleagues who were opposed to the pandas theory were waiting for the moment to attack Sue Sweeto and her colleagues who were advancing the theory. So the data didn't make any difference.
And I was sort of really flabbergasted about the way some colleagues treated other colleagues.
I'm better than you are. I publish more papers. I have a higher whatever. And that's just unfortunate because we're in this together. We're all interconnected, and we need to find a way to help these families and these children in the best way that we can.
So that wasn't the way it happened. I would argue strongly that we're not going to make progress in developing new treatments for any disease if the message is we can't challenge hypotheses that exist.
I don't consider myself being mean or unduly critical in an inappropriate or unprofessional way, but I think some of the arguments have been fairly heated, either in person or in print. And that may relate to the personalities of some of the people that have written them.
Again, I do not think there is any good scientific evidence that antibiotic treatment has any value for children with tics or OCD. I think that there is good evidence now that shows that strep infection does not appear to be an important factor in causing a worsening of symptoms in children, even if they meet the Sweeto criteria for pandas.
He's the antichrist of pandas. I mean, I'll use that word, okay? I've said it before. He's the antichrist of pandas. His mission in life is to destroy that.
They have decided, especially Roger Curlin, that she's just created a cult, a religion of a disease. I don't get it. I don't know what their motive is.
The implication was that our data were fraudulent, that we were liars, and that it was very ugly in a way that, again, I'm a pediatrician and I hadn't experienced that.
If you're bothered by the word pandas, let's come up with some alternative criteria that we can all live with, but will now not force us to exclude kids that we would otherwise treat with antibiotics.
Okay, now you know what pandas is. There's a thing like PANDAS called PANS. It stands for Pediatric Acute Onset Neuropsychiatric Syndrome. It's the same symptoms as PANDAS, only it's caused from anything that's not strep.
The neurologists, Drs. Kurlan, Mink, and Singer, all vote against the PANS concept, even though Dr. Singer does agree to help the group create a white paper. What the group didn't know was that Dr. Singer was writing his own paper, titled Moving from PANDAS to CANS, or Childhood Acute Neuropsychiatric Symptoms, a paper that for the most part excluded strep as a cause for the sudden changes in these children. The authors state that the PANDAS condition remains controversial, and the routine use of antibiotics or immune-modifying therapies is not recommended. The paper was co-authored by Donald Gilbert, David Wolfe, Jonathan Mink, and Roger Kurlan.
Dr. Singer and Dr. Kurlan both felt that the consensus that was emerging from that meeting was incorrect, and that had the potential to give a lot of weight to a clinical practice that would not help patients.
We did not write this paper saying, we feel offended here, and so we're going to write a paper that's going to slam the idea.
I think that pediatricians who had been somewhat neutral read the debate in there and concluded that PANDAS doesn't exist, and if it does, it's so controversial, I'm not going to touch it.
Adding to the controversy, the authors failed to disclose ties to the pharmaceutical industry, and in particular to Cyadon, a manufacturer of a tick medication. When asked to comment on this, Drs. Kurlan and Singer both declined invitations to be part of this documentary.
In this particular case, one or more of us did not completely fill out our conflict of interest form, or I'm not sure. The key thing is a potential conflict of interest, I think.
Yes, the disclosure should have been made. It was ultimately made, but actually in the context of that paper, it would have been a much bigger deal if one of us was developing a competitor to IVIG, for example.
As it turns out, Cyadon's patent applications reveal the company is indeed developing alternative treatments for these patients. The patent claims their medication is effective for Tourette's syndrome, and ironically, PANDAS.
Well, Big Pharma has all sorts of issues, and, they have a conflict of interest, and they have a vested interest in their product.
I don't think there was a conspiracy there. I don't think that's played into the problem with PANDAS at all. I actually think it's much more about the fact that this is such a paradigm shift. It is such a sea change in the way we think about behavioral abnormalities and mental illness.
Autoimmunity has not been put with behavior before. It changes the way we think about mental disorders actually forever.
I think there are children all over the country who are in psych wards who shouldn't be because they have PANDAS.
It was so terrifying. You're supposed to be the protector of your child, and someone takes that from you. It's just a helpless feeling.
I miss my family. Miss my brother, my sister, Dad, Mom, my whole family.
Preston is confined to the adolescent psychiatric unit in New Orleans and is having tremendous separation anxiety. His medical records show that psychiatrists have added Zyprexa, Risperdal, Lexapro, and Ativan.
When that's not working, they'll add another medication. And then if that's not working, they'll change the dose or maybe change the medication. So it can take a long time for people that really stay on the medications before anybody says this is absolutely not working. I think it depends on the tolerance for suffering that either the parents have or the psychiatrist has.
Noting Preston's oppositional defiance, in this case not eating, they place him in darkened solitary, called the quiet room.
Like I couldn't sit down, I couldn't touch anything. And like when I couldn't sit down, they would put me in like this dark room, like a timeout room. And like it was really bad. And I couldn't eat, and they were serving fried catfish that night. and I couldn't eat it, and that was my favorite food. Like,
he was very dehydrated, I could tell. I didn't even recognize him. He had gone down since he'd been in there.
There's no way that that was behavioral. No child is going to decide to one day just stop eating and tell you he wants to eat and just can't do it. That's, to me, I knew it wasn't behavioral, but that's where everybody was pointing. That's what everybody was telling us, it was behavioral.
I had figured out what I thought was wrong with him, and so I called the physician and asked her to please run this test on him. I was very excited because they're drawing lab work every day anyway. And she immediately said no, that she thought about Pandas when he came in, but he did not meet criteria. And that if I thought something was medically wrong with him, I could come and pick him up and have him cleared myself.
You know, this is a political and logistic problem. There are no psych hospitals that are really good at doing medicine, and there's no medical hospitals that can deal with severely psychiatric patients. The two are really incompatible with one another because, you know, psychiatric hospitals really are geared towards, the whole model is based on therapy, talk therapy, and drugs, and not really investigating what's behind things.
So after nearly 2 weeks in an adolescent psychiatric hospital, the doctors release Preston. His discharge orders list him as stable and prognosis good, despite the fact that he hasn't eaten in more than 10 days while under their care.
It's upsetting to me. I was taught in pediatric residence, listen to the mother, listen to the mother.
Someone did finally listen to Kim. Preston's anti-DNase B was significantly elevated, indicating he had a recent strep infection. Not definitive proof, but combined with his OCD and lack of response to behavioral medications, it is another clue for finding treatment.
I started a high dose of Augmentin once a day, and I stopped the Risperdal. The Zoloft had been stopped previously.
But I started noticing little things within a week or so of him on antibiotics. He could touch light switches. He wanted to bathe himself after about 2 weeks. And at 3 weeks, I think he had completely gained 85% of his normal functioning back.
My objection came that when you guys wrote the cans paper, it wasn't so much that it was the 3 out of 41 people there who wanted to call it cans, and that Harvey Singer held up our paper to write yours. No, that was, okay, yes it was. I am by nature petty and bitter, but...
I'm not.
The thing that frankly made me the most upset about that paper was that there was such a bias against strep being a potential cause of any neuropsychiatric symptoms, that a throat culture and look for titers was not something that was included in the medical workup. So yes, we've been biased in the pro-pandas direction, but I think the biases have been on both sides. And the strep mutates all the time. So if one of them changes to be more rheumatogenic or pandasgenic, then you're going to have an outbreak of pandas in a community next to one who has absolutely no cases, because the strep that's going around those schools is different than the strep that's going in this school.
But it's not always just a strep throat. You can have strep throat, you can have strep in your nose causing impetigo, you can have perianal strep, you can have vaginal strep, you can have penile strep, you can have eczema that's infected with strep. There's multiple places that strep can be that nobody looks for. And the kids come into the office and I look at them and I said, that's strep.
Of course, strep is a foreign bacteria and your body doesn't want it there, so it reacts to those streptococci. So the immune system has 2 important components: the antibodies, which bind to other proteins and attack bacteria, and T cells, which help the body make antibodies. These T cells, we discovered, were a unique brand of T cells called Th17 T cells. These T cells seem to be migrating along the nerve that senses smell. And they actually enter the brain along this nerve. The consequence of that is that the blood-brain barrier becomes leaky. And once the blood-brain barrier becomes leaky, antibody leaves the blood vessels and can get into the brain. The nerve generates an abnormal signal that produces the symptoms of both Sydenham's chorea and pandas.
A lot of people have thought about mental disorders and Freud, and that the Freudian thoughts are more that it is something happening in our brain that isn't even associated with biologic processes. And this is just not true. Our bodies are all biologic, and even though years ago we may have not thought of the brain as being a biologic organ, it's just as biologic as the heart or the kidney. And we know a lot about the kidney and the heart now, but the brain is the last frontier.
The name of this PET scan is Pk11195 Pet Scanning. Now, this chemical called Pk11195 binds to a cell. It's an inflammatory cell in the brain, and it binds to the PK compound, and we see a signal. Ordinarily, you shouldn't see much of a signal at all because most of our brains are not inflamed. And in pandas, what we are finding is increased binding of the PK compound in deep structures in the brain called the thalamus and the basal ganglia. This patient is a patient with pandas. I see this increased binding, this inflammation. It doesn't tell me that this is psychiatric. It tells me this is an organic disturbance in the brain.
DNA is a long molecule which contains genetic code. It gives our bodies instructions for making proteins. Doctors and scientists agree that DNA has important clues for curing disease.
It's been hard to convince the medical community and the scientific community that this is an inflammatory disease. But we found that these children are more likely to have variants in their genes in this part of the chromosome called the HLA region. And so what we found actually is a few variants that are strongly associated with PANS. There have been over 500 autoimmune diseases linked to genes in the same area of the chromosome. So we feel this is definitive evidence that there is an autoimmune component to this disease.
It's like a seizure. It's like watching your child be attacked by a ghost. It's the most out of the blue, random, intense overtaking that you could ever imagine. I don't really know what to relate it to.
You know, this is a disease that's, in her case, we think caused by strep, and so we want to kind of clean the house out before we start to get her better. And so what Dr. Harley explained is that taking out our tonsils will really allow us to access the tonsils fully and see what's behind them, what's under them.
Taking the tonsils out changes the whole immunobiology. There was a greater benefit when they had the tonsillectomy followed by IVIG. So that's always my suggestion. And I always warn parents, by the way, tonsillectomy does not cure pandas.
It hurts really bad.
We took the tonsils out with a plan to do IVIG. I think that there's a lot of reconvincing yourself that you're doing the right path, and there isn't a test that gives you a number that makes you sure that this is exactly where you're at in the process of healing. It's not A plus B equals C thing.
Dr. Latimer recommended a course of steroids and antibiotics for Catherine, starting with a steroid burst and then gradually tapering down over the course of a month.
Oh, you're doing that again? All right. How's it taste?
That one went down.
That one, I know it did. That was a big one too.
And I'm not spitting really.
Yeah.
We were told that it's possible that she will relapse. So we are cautiously
I think it's probable she'll relapse.
Well, I'd like to
Yeah, I know.
possible because she's doing so well right now.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Our fingers
Yes,
are crossed.
crossed.
You know, it's very difficult, and I honestly feel like I don't know if we're doing the right thing.
We're suffering.
Yeah.
We're taking lumps.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think we haven't been beaten down.
No.
We're getting back up every day and fighting.
No.
Yeah.
We talk sometimes about parental PTSD of pandas, that they more than their child fear that this will come back someday, fear that they're not going to be able to handle it. Marriages have failed. Parents have sort of been left on their own.
My dad's side of the family thinks that it's all psychological.
Here she is sick and suffering and doesn't have the love and support of her family, and even worse, not believing her and saying, your mother's making you ill.
For a long time, I blamed myself for the divorce, and I still kind of do, even though I've been reassured that it's not my fault. But I feel like if I wasn't so sick, it wouldn't have created such a wedge in my parents' marriage. Nobody plans to have a sick kid. Nobody thinks that it could happen to them. They always say parent intuition is such a strong thing. My mom always thought they were missing something. I, as the patient, always thought they were missing something. If you put all the times together, the therapy sessions, the doctor's appointments, the 7-week stay at McLean's, all it took was 6 hours of this stuff.
Unfortunately, 3 to 4 months later, after the IVIG, she experienced an infectious episode that kind of threw her back. And from that point, recovery was only partial.
Unfortunately for Drew, it didn't last, but we knew that, for sure, this is it. We have our answer now. This is what she has. I never gave up. I just kept searching, searching for an answer.
She was absolutely non-functional. She couldn't work anymore. Her anxiety and her worries and fears were just so very, very severe that her life was just small and total hell.
I'm hoping to get for my, what is that word? My problems to get better. I'm really hoping that after this is done, I'll be at least halfway a normal person rather than barely functioning half the time. And I'm really hoping to get better. And hopefully all the way better. That would be cool. Yeah.
IVIG for pandas and pans may last for hours spread out over several days. It may take weeks or months before there are signs that it is working.
How do you get coverage for IVIG or pheresis? Have the insurance companies started to pay for this indication?
Well, the suggestion here was move to Canada, but I can affirm. But again, they only pay for it in select diagnoses, and the governments are increasingly, due to the cost of IVIG and the potential risks of IVIG.
I would say the most stressful thing for our marriage, though, has been the financial impact, and it's not necessarily been the illness.
Our kid got sick. We searched around for answers. When we finally found the answer, and then the insurance company says no.
Second bill, similar situation. It's House Bill 984. It's relative to insurance coverage for pandas and pans. We're in a situation where young children are afflicted by a disease, and insurance companies don't want to pay for the treatment. Let's look at IVIG. So I'm looking at a treatment protocol and procedure that is expensive. But if it works, how can we deny it? And ultimately, what's the long-term cost? I think health insurance is supposed to be covering you for all of your conditions. And I don't think that an 8-year-old child or someone who's younger should have to suffer and the family have to suffer because we're not paying for it. So I applaud Jacob and his wife Heather, and for coming forward.
The legislation was really born out of Jacob's frustration, and I feel like it was such a positive thing because it gave him a place to put all of those feelings and redirect them into something that felt good.
We really weren't prepared for what we heard next. Our insurance company said no. We had a team of specialists all advocating that this was the best treatment choice for our daughter, and the insurance company said no. We protested, we appealed twice. 4 months we went back and forth. Our studies, their studies, our experts, their experts. I mean, it's a system where the deck is really stacked against the family. Ultimately, the fate of our family really was shaped by an insurance company doctor, a doctor who doesn't treat patients, and a doctor who had never examined our daughter.
So we knew if we sold the house that we would have more options to be with the kids. And so that felt really easy because it's just a house. It's terrible that we play like the worst case scenario game, but we think, okay, what if we were going through this and one of us wasn't well? We actually say things like that out loud to just, give ourselves a reality check that,
Could be worse.
It could be worse. It could be worse. And so, yeah, that's why we smile.
Sometimes we don't know any better, so we just smile.
I didn't take anything by mouth, and my mouth would be really dry, because I didn't eat or drink for 60 days. So, but then at the end, when I was gradually getting better, I would wrench my mouth out. And one day I swallowed a little bit, so that felt good, and yeah.
Catherine's back to school, usually later morning, about 10 o'clock, and she's starting to stay through lunch. And then when she comes home, she has a tutor in the afternoon for about an hour and a half. I don't think her endurance is quite where it was before, and her attention is still a little bit off. The eating is going very well.
But is this strawberry? So, yeah.
Oh, we're doing okay. I think we're all still in shock, or slowly coming out of shock. I don't think we're out of it yet. I'm not sure I ever will be, honestly. Completely.
Yeah, it's going to take a lot of therapy to get him over this, over the thoughts and the post-traumatic stress of being in the hospital.
I was really looking forward to this because I wanted to share my story and I want everybody to know it.
Why is that important to you?
So that any other kids, they can know about it and not have to go through what I did.
About a month ago, my daughter was diagnosed with strep, my 1-year-old. I realized at that point that I'd seen a little bit of a change in Preston. As the weeks went on, a week or two went on, his behavior escalated. And he lost all the ground that we gained, and he was back to square one, how he was 2 years ago. We did a steroid burst and started new antibiotics. As the days go by, he wants to know, when is this going to end and how much longer is he going to have to suffer?
Amanda, she was able to go out and get a job. She started going back to college. She's been just amazing. It seems like every couple of weeks, she's just that much sharper. She's got so much hope now for her future, and she has hope of having that normal life.
I thought that I would never be normal. I wasn't normal. I was far away from being normal at all. And I thought that I would never, ever go out to see the world, or I'd never make it past my house. For a long time, everybody thought that I would never live on my own, that I would have to have somebody live with me to teach me how to do normal things, like how to pay a bill or how to pay my car payment. I don't want to be angry at people, but I am angry at people because there's a reason. They are the reason why I grew up so horribly. But I mean, all it's gonna do is just hurt me. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know how to let go of everything. I don't know how to do that.
Look at that long slide, and there's one toilet.
We just saw a slow, gradual healing and return of her personality and able to do things that we would expect her to be able to do, and her behavior went back to normal.
Just the remarkable improvement after IVIG, I mean, it's pretty clear. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind.
It's undeniable. I feel like I'm experiencing life with a whole new set of eyes, and that I see joy in things that I totally took for granted before. So, I mean, I'm thankful for it in a way.
Only fairly recently, starting to let go of the cautiousness. It takes a while. I mean, there's definitely still some PTSD there, but it's fading too.
You know, that was my reading of the paper when you originally published it. It was, wow. So I have to think about this in every child who has new onset of tics, who has exacerbations and remissions. And it's become clear that, well, this is a rare entity in children who have tics rather than a common entity.
No, it's an uncommon. It's not rare.
Okay.
I think it's missed more commonly than it is overdiagnosed still. When you actually do a very systematic assessment of the relationship between strep and tics and problem behaviors, there's a one-to-one correlation, and it's extraordinarily tight. So one of my key research questions right now is, if this is a relatively common phenomenon, why do some kids go on to have this horrific illness and the rest of them are okay?
I'd still call it rare.
That's fine. You can call it rare just as long as you say maybe it occurs sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone accepts that scarlet fever, inflammation of the skin, which causes the scarletiniform rash, is a known complication of a strep infection. Everybody acknowledges that carditis associated with rheumatic fever, which is a known complication of a strep infection, exists. But when you start talking about inflammation of the brain after strep, for some reason it no longer makes sense. That makes no sense to me.
I would hope that every doctor would react like Dr. Ashley did. It's exactly what we are hoping will happen.
Almost exactly 5.5 weeks into Logan's, I'm calling it remission because I don't know what else to call it. You know, he had his problems for 9 months, and then Logan was 90% back. Wait. Because it had been so long since I had seen healthy Logan or normal acting Logan that I could not I couldn't wrap my mind around how awesome it could be. I mean, he's come a long, long way. You know, he still has some hurdles because his immune system is terrible, but you would not know by looking at him.
Here's the church, here's the steeple. Open the doors oh, I did it wrong. Okay. Here's the church, here's the steeple. Open the doors and here's all the people.
Today was Logan's first day of kindergarten. Logan did not show any signs or symptoms of nervousness or the normal tics or behaviors that we're used to.
Only 8 months ago, he was dismissed from a school because his behavior was so bad. And this morning, first day of kindergarten, you know, not chaos, but just a lot more than he's used to, a lot of people and everything. He was like, you know, bye, Grandma, Grandpa, you know, and I was like, my gosh, he's being bigger about this than I am.
The parents that figure this out for themselves and take it to the doctor, they're the ones that blow my mind. I'm in complete awe of them, and I'm so grateful that Dr. Ashley knew what to look for.
far and wide across the ocean.
What is that?
That's the green sea turtle. I'll tell you what each of them are, though. It shouldn't be about egos and anything like that. It should be about whatever it takes to heal a child.
Thank you for the dream, and thank you for staying.
Well, she was doing fabulous. Loving school, playing softball, just getting back to baseline.
Kat was very lucky. It is very unusual for a child with severe anorexia needing an NG tube to not need plasmapheresis.
I think the parents' decision, clearly the parents' decision was appropriate in this case to hold off on the plasmapheresis and see if the steroids and antibiotics would be enough, and it was. And that completely fits with our experience in Sydenham, Korea, our experience with pandas, our experience even with other forms of autoimmune encephalitis, that early intervention, early recognition is much easier to treat.
As I've said a few times, I'm in favor of whatever works, and let's do the less invasive things first. Yes, antibiotics, but not one antibiotic, but 2 or 3. Then there's the whole question about the steroids, which I tend to avoid, partly because they can have some potentially negative effects as well. But that was also part of the picture. SSRIs, well, let's change it to one that I'm a little more comfortable with and have had better experience with, but she was on that for a long time. Cognitive behavioral therapy. If you ask me, Tim, honestly, Dr. Leckman, do you think that that really made a difference in her course of illness? I would say yes.
So yeah, the stress of this morning. Just get
that
it
isn't
out.
stress anymore.
It's not stress.
That's not stress anymore.
But again, in the back of my mind, is she gonna make it out the door today? There was a little bit of that.
Yeah, but there's no reason to even think about that. Even though I did too.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay.
And 3, 2, 1. Gotcha. Great.
But we don't know what's coming. I mean,
Yeah.
she could relapse. At the moment, she's healthy. She wants to go to school. I mean, we're gonna support and love her no matter what.
I'm very happy for anyone that catches this early. And I think there is some sort of jealousy but there's really no point in being jealous because being jealous isn't gonna make me any better. It's not gonna improve anything. And, sometimes it's 2 steps back, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, and it feels like a never-ending cycle. And then there's days where I, go grocery shopping and cook dinner for everyone and go out with my friends. And some days it's easy, some days it's not. And it's a day-by-day thing.
I know I certainly regret any time that she didn't receive appropriate treatment. And I think that's probably true for lots of kids then and still now.
Where are we going tonight?
To the ranch. We're going line dancing. I don't know, they generally call kids with pandas, they have old souls. They grow up fast because they have to deal with stuff that's not meant to be dealt with until adulthood.
I see her starting to live more like a normal 20-year-old, but my biggest fear is, what if she doesn't get better? And who's gonna be there to take care of her?
I'd love to be optimistic and say that there's a chance of me ending up with a degree and living on my own and pursuing dreams. But a lot of my illnesses have robbed those possibilities and taken away those dreams and extinguished that flame of hope and possibility, which I think I've come to terms with. Like, I used to get really down and depressed about the fact that nothing was working out in my favor, but I think it's easier if you accept it and then focus on what you can do.
It was missed, and you're not faulting anybody. You say, but boy, I know what it is now, and if I had, caught it back then, we could have had a different outcome.
Everyone has a right to be upset if something is missed that's important. And the truth is that all of us who get sick, are at risk for that. And, the best physicians make a lot of errors. In Drew's case, we don't really know what the trigger might have been.
It's a profound loss of life is what happens. And, Yeah, it pisses me off.
There are no crazy people. There are sick people and there are healthy people.
I live here, where you're videotaping. I live in Earth House. It's a group home. I was in hospital from when I was 15 to when I was 18, and now I live here. Yeah, I feel anxious when I'm not moving. I'm not sure what it is. It might be, it's just hyperactivity. That means when you get really hyper. I pause sometimes. I can't finish my sentences sometimes, and I pause. It just feels,
Hank Aaron, famous Boy Scout. I have chosen Hank Aaron for this biography because he is a baseball player and I enjoy baseball. I had no idea he was a Boy Scout.
He went from being an advanced student to being pretty much a special needs student. The neurologist did a lot of testing, and he diagnosed him with OCD, ADHD, and Tourette's, and said it was possibly pandas. And then eventually he decided it was probably pandas. They did try the last resort gold standard drug for schizophrenia, which was clozapine. Months and months went by and it didn't help.
And I said, don't you realize the best medical advances in history have come from out-of-the-box thinkers? And he quoted Latin, and it was a little patronizing, and condescending, but they just had their set ways and they wouldn't change their minds.
There were a whole sequence of things that happened. It wasn't just one event. It was a whole sequence of things. And I think there were even times where he made some real recovery, but the fact that somehow things sort of continued to progress in one way or another is a tragedy.
If Gary had been hospitalized and they had treated it as pandas and had done IVIG in the hospital and just tried it, I think Gary would have had a shot. Gary could be going to college right now. You know, Gary could be living a normal life right now.
That's one of the worst things I've ever heard, and it's not one of the worst things I've ever heard. I hear that story over and over and over. Yeah, that's the collateral damage of this controversy.
You shouldn't be ashamed of having pandas, but it's a horrible thing to have, and more people should know about it. Don't feel bad for me. I'm not really suffering. It's okay. I'm not suffering that much.
Close all the curtains, block out all the light, hold on to your burden, cry all night. How did I get here? How do I leave? I wanna dry my tears, I want some relief. How did I get here? How do I go? I just wanna know. 'Cause it's like running down an endless dead-end street. It's like rowing a boat on a riverbed with no stream. It's like putting a puzzle together with one missing piece. How did I get here and how do I leave?